My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. Today, I am joined by somebody across the pond, all the way in the UK. Her name is Apiramy Jeyarajah, and she's the head of UK Wholesale at Aviva Investors, and she's also Diversity Project Ambassador. So Apiramy, welcome to the show. Do you have a nickname that you go by?
It's Abby.
Abby? Perfect, awesome. So Abby, welcome to the show. Thank you for making time. I know it's like the end of your day there. For me, I like to always start at the beginning, and I know that I read in some other places kind of a little bit about your upbringing, but tell people who are listening a bit about how you were brought up and maybe how that played a part in you choosing a career in finance, which you are now very successful in.
Thank you for having me, Lara. It's a pleasure to be here. Where does my story really start? I came over from Sri Lanka to London when I was 2 years old. I think the defining moment from my upbringing is actually what my dad used to always say to me, which was that you're no less than anybody else. You can do anything that you want to be. And I think that's where it's always driven me to always do more and never let anything stop me in my way. It was a pretty traditional upbringing overall. I did majority sciences, but I also did a lot of extracurricular activities through sports and music as well, which was very good in helping me being a lot more rounded and in soft skill sets. That means that it was much easier to get your first grad role through to post-university. But my post-university education, I ended up in the US actually when I first started, and that curiosity is what's probably driven me so far.
What sports did you play when you were younger, out of curiosity?
Tennis mostly, netball, swimming, a lot of it in terms of county sports as well. So that was great fun. But it was not so fun when you're doing that on a Saturday at 6 a.m. in the morning and having to do that multiple times before you go into school. But it put me in good stead.
Do you still play sports at all?
I still play tennis, although my elbow is injured at the moment for the last 6 months, but I'm definitely getting back into it next month.
Got it, okay. So what was like that spark, I don't know if it was in your childhood or like later on, that made you choose that path, in education and then eventually a career in finance, especially being on the trading floor? Because I know women here that are in finance, and obviously things are changing, but it's been a traditionally male-dominated space or industry.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I completely dreamt about doing this my whole life. I don't think it was very much like that. It was just seeing what was out there, and it just looked very glamorous, and it seemed like a great place to be. It absolutely was a hard place to get into, but I didn't let that stop me, because it just goes back to, I don't think I consciously realized it, but I think the upbringing part, where my dad always said you could always be anything, held me, was like, well, why can't I do that job if everyone else was going to do it? And that's what really drove me into doing it. I think I looked at the programs. They looked quite exciting. I also thought it was going to give me a job that I could retire in 10 years time. So I'll be retired by 30. Definitely has not happened. So I thought it was a quick way of being able to make a lot of money, be very successful, and move on from there. But I don't think I truly understood the details of that when I entered the program. And getting into the program wasn't so easy, because for the reason that you said, I think at the final stages, I was always the only female on the trading floor interviews. And the question that was always being asked is, how are you going to cope being the only female? And that did not get me in the first time round, actually, in the first round of grad interviews. But the next time round, you learn from how you approach some of those questions and get in the next time round.
Has your perception of working in the finance industry changed? Like you mentioned, one of the reasons you chose it was, there's things you liked about it, but also it's an opportunity to potentially make a large amount of money in a short period of time. And potentially, if you wanted to move on from there and look at other things. Has that perspective changed as you kind of continue to work in the space?
Yeah, I think I think your perspective on what you want to achieve in life changes. So for me, it's about what good can I do in any role that I do. whether that's what I do in finance or what I do in the diversity project. What can you do that's going to be for good? Also, when you start working in finance, you sort of assume, so a lot of assumptions I went into it with is that I did a lot of sciences, so all you need to do is be really good at the sciences and then be successful. Actually, it's not even that. The stat is that ability is not even 40% of what gets you to where you need to be. The majority is sort of your image and your reputation that gets you the rest of the way. It's learning those soft skill sets, which I wasn't really aware of growing up. So how is it that you're going to manage your stakeholders? How are you going to manage your image? So those are the soft skills that you develop over time. That probably is the biggest differentiator. Also, then being self-aware. So what is it that you're really good at, that you're going to be successful in that role? And it doesn't necessarily need to be in finance. Turns out although it's taken me 10 plus years to figure it out, is that my skill sets is all around being in front of clients. It's about understanding and being a conversation, what really happens, to negotiate. I could do that in the arts. I could do that in all sorts of things. But you pick up those transferable skills, and then you decide what career or what choices you want to make post that. At the moment, I'm still in finance, but that could change.
You mentioned like self-image or like just image, or reputation, but how would you say that if I were to ask one of your colleagues to describe you, what would they say? What do you think they would say?
Well, I like to think they'll say that I'm friendly, but I think that what they'll probably say is that I get the job done, that I can, navigate, the dynamics of a working environment and solve problems that they might have.
Got it. Just in like your career as well, I know recently you moved to Aviva from HSBC. And I'm always curious, like I told you before we chatted or jumped on the podcast officially, why did you decide to move from, HSBC to Aviva? What particularly attracted you to the opportunity or the company?
Actually, it was even simpler than that. I met an individual that was incredibly inspiring to work for. And that's what was a driving factor for the role change, which meant that I was going to learn a lot from somebody. And it was also, I was taking on additional responsibility. So I was originally responsible for one part of the sales business, but I was taking on the entire UK sales business. And so that was a great learning opportunity as well, to be able to take over the budget and the division. And it's also about driving what good looks like now. So being able to influence that was really what was quite exciting for me, to let me take that step outside of HSBC, because I was doing I enjoyed what I was doing. It was a great role, great business. But being able to define that and have even bigger platform was what was the changing point for me to move to Aviva.
So what exactly does the head of UK Wholesale do? It sounds like a very fancy title, but I'd like to kind of understand what you do.
Well, it varies from day to day, but for example, today I've done a lot of leadership meetings, understanding what the larger business is doing versus what we're currently doing, what alignment and problems that we might need to have done and solved. I've had my own team meeting as well, to see what the team's been up to, and they've had things pitched to them. Once we're off the call here, I'll be on the phone to clients to catch up on some of the things that they're doing with my team and things that they might need commercially agreed upon. So typically the day for me starts normally at 6 a.m, but that's me going, when I start and finish the day, also including the gym and that sort of thing. But each day is flexible. It's not a rigid structure, because it's very dictated around what my team might need, what the business might need, but also what clients may need. So it's a 24-hour role sometimes.
So again, I guess I'm confused by terms that I see used in other industries that are used in finance as well. So when I think wholesale, I have a different perception of what I think wholesale is. Like, you sell wholesale, you sell retail. So maybe it's the same kind of analogy, but when you say UK wholesale, what does that exactly mean? Like, what kind of products or services, like, what are you, I guess, helping your clients with? This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me.
Okay. So what
You have
we
to really
help
dumb it down for me. So
so it's about helping solve savings and retirement solutions into the marketplace. So my sales team faces off the wealth and savings and retirement market in the UK. The UK is the second largest market versus just after the US, actually. This little island controls that much assets. That's 9.2 trillion that's sitting in the UK, 1.5 trillion, which is UK domestic wealth. What we end up looking at is offering investment solutions, which might be equities, fixed income, or multi-asset propositions, or even things like real assets and infrastructure, to be held as part of someone's holdings. And we tend to work with intermediaries. So wholesale refers to the fact that we're really facing off to banks, other discretionary firms. So if we're looking at, so RBC, for example, would be a client. I'm thinking of Canadian names just off the top of my head. Okay. JP Morgan's a client, Barclays Bank, Santander, but then all the way through to individual IFAs, which are independent financial advisors, which you also have in Canada, who might be tied. And we face off them to provide them with products that they can then pass on to clients like you and I. So in the UK, we have something called an ISA, which is a savings product. I don't know what the equivalent is in Canada, so apologies. And that's what someone will be putting their savings into over whatever it might be, a 1, 5, 10, 15 or 30-year horizon. So it's all the way through that spectrum of clients. And we have a separate team that looks up things like pension funds, but charities also come into my world. So it just refers to different types of clients that we might face off to.
Got it. So you have a bunch of products that you sell to like the banks, or like you said, financial advisors and things like that. Have you noticed a trend of like working with, I don't know what you call them down there, like robo-advisors, or like these digital platforms that, there's, I guess that would be the term, right? Like digital platforms. Yeah. Like I'm thinking of like a Wealth Simple or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, so we would face off organizations like that, but we would offer them one of our investment solutions that they could host on their platform.
Got it.
And it is the newest trend that's taking the marketplace at the moment.
Got it.
So then, robo-advisors are intermediating in a different way to face off the mass market. So they will probably be added to what I just said to you in terms of advisors. Robo-advisors would be one of the clients as well that are growing quite fast into the space.
Do you ever hear the critique on like in finance, or not critique, but like there's a growing trend of like the robo-advisors, just other, more and more people talking about like just, products like ETFs or just index funds versus like, do you see, I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but do you still see the trend of advisors being important, like human people, like I guess human advisors still advising people on like how to manage their wealth or retirement, given that there's more and more products that have very low fees, that require very little maintenance, that don't really require like a human being to actually tell you what to do. You just kind of, buy the S&P 500 index fund, or, put it into a robo-advisor and answer a few questions, and it'll invest it for you without you having to interact with anybody. Again, I don't know if this is something that you would see or be privy to in your day-to-day, but I'm just curious about that as well.
It is my area. So, okay. So in my old job, I at HSBC, I was very much focused on ETFs and index funds as well as active funds. It's a complex answer to that question. So historically, the more money you had, the more dedicated face-to-face advice that you wanted. So you would have a private banker who would come and follow you around the world and give you all of your needs. The reality is, even though you might have 30 or 100 or a billion worth of assets, you still want to have access to something via your phone. So that historically, digital advice would have been something for the lower end customer, but that's not the case anymore. So what has changed is how you segment your client and the servicing that they require. So it's a different type of service. The need for face-to-face is not going away. So 5 years ago, even at HSBC, we had that conversation. So are we going to lose our sales teams? And, I've just joined to build a sales team. So you're kind of going, well, what's in it for me? Is their job really? But actually, all humans by humans. Everyone wants face-to-face interaction. That's not going away. But the way in which we interact will. So, for example, you might have a more sophisticated CRM system that will give you all the information about that individual before you talk to them. That you don't have as much time doing your due diligence before you have that conversation. So that's the sort of thing that will change. In the UK, because I don't know the stats for Canada or the US offhand, but in the UK, there's a massive advice gap, particularly for individuals that are in the lower end of the spectrum that don't qualify to have sufficient assets for an advisor. So that is a problem, because everyone deserves to have advice. Everyone deserves to have a sustainable savings and retirement opportunity. So the need for face-to-face won't go away, but there might be different ways, particularly leveraging robo, that you can provide some guided advice that will be more cost efficient for a lot of advisors or for other organizations to step in and help solve that problem.
You talked about, as you're joining, there's this fear of, as these trends are emerging, is there even a role for me building a sales team? So I guess as a leader, where a lot of your job revolves around, either interacting with customers or like building your team and kind of empowering them, but even building the team, there's kind of this general talk about, this great resignation, or the great, I guess, I forgot the other term I heard, but just kind of people thinking about what they really want to do, where they want to work, how they want to work. How has that impacted you? Like, are you finding it hard to find people that, like, I don't know if you're back in the office or like if it's completely remote, but tell us a bit about how that's impacted you from like a hiring or team building perspective.
That's a great question, because so much has changed. So, when you interview now, the second question you are asked is, what is your smart working policy? Individuals are willing to take a pay cut if it doesn't meet their needs. Then actually, money is no longer the main motivator. So building teams now is, and which has been the case actually for the last, particularly with the newest generation with Gen Z in place, what motivates them is different. So how you do your hiring needs to be very different. Particularly now that we're, everyone in the world is thinking about diversity of thought and how you get more people from different backgrounds into the industry. Actually, a one size does not fit all. So as an example, standard procedures may be that for a senior hire, there's like 5, max 10 interviews. But actually for, a female or any minority, and I'll include type B white males as a minority as well, that might not work for them, because they might be motivated by different factors. You might need to spend a lot more time at the beginning to convince them to come on the journey of interviewing with you. So that's been really a fascinating exercise as we've been building out the team, because that's what you find. And you need to bespoke your hiring process to the individual rather than to do a blanket way, because you end up losing a lot of interesting talent as a result. You also have to hunt in different pools. Particularly right now, just to answer your question, we are back in the office. We're back in the office on average 3 days a week. The COVID restrictions eased up just earlier in the month. But the market is very different from 18 months ago. 18 months ago, there's a wealth of talent in the marketplace that you can tap into. At the moment, there's very little talent out in the marketplace. Everything's going at a very high margin. And when every organization is being cost constrained, particularly in terms of profitability over this COVID period, you need to be more creative in terms of how you bring talent into the organization and find interesting individuals. So it's an interesting time at the moment. It's incredibly challenging, but also rewarding if you can find the right groups of people. And also it forces an organization to think about what good looks like and try a different approach to get what they need.
And you don't have to answer this, but as you're talking about like bespoking or like customizing the offer to the individual and the approach, what's been the most, you don't have to say the name or anything, just like it doesn't have to be current, but in your experience of like trying to find, a particular type of talent and getting that person and then, offering them a package, what's been the most interesting type of package? Because you said money isn't the key thing. So what's been like the most interesting type of package that you've offered to a talent that you really wanted?
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you.
It's been really varied, actually. So I had an individual, a lady, join the team a little while ago, and she was super keen, got her all over the line, but there was a lot of sticking points that she ultimately had. And she had prepped her way, sat me down for 45 minutes saying all sorts of things. I didn't understand where she was going with this conversation, but she had 2 children. But all she wanted was to be able to pick her children up one day a week and pick them up and take them to school one day a week. And she wanted, it was a holiday that has childcare in Mauritius every November. That was her ask. But the way she positioned it, it looked like there was, something that was, something that I could not provide her. And that was a really easy answer. But if she had said that in the first 30 seconds, the answer would have been yes too. So for me, that it just makes you realize that you don't really know what motivates people and what's really driving them. By the way, she's by far, but was the most successful salesperson I've ever met. Very different in her work ethic, super strong, always getting things done. But it's about creating a safe space for every individual to be able to share what their biggest fears are, what they trust you, what their desires are, and what they need to thrive. And that's the thing. Every individual, we're all a sum of our parts. What each of us needs to thrive is differently. For her, that was what it was. But the relief on her face from the moment she said that was, I will never forget. It was one of my highlights.
That's amazing. One of the other things beyond kind of, what you do in terms of building teams and talking to clients is you are the diversity project ambassador. So tell us a bit more about this and why it's so important to you.
So as an ambassador, you're really showcasing the practices of the Diversity Project, which is an organisation that was set up by Helena Morrissey, more than 5 years ago now, and there's hundreds of ambassadors. And what we're looking to do is showcase how you can drive better practices in the finance industry across different spectrums of diversity of thought. I mean, I lead the intersectionality workstream of the Diversity Project, which is part of the ethnicity workstream. So why do? I do it because I want to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong. So if each individual feel like they belong, you create a more diverse workforce with diversity of thought, which then in the case of our funds generate better alpha, in the case of our clients deliver something that represents the clients that we serve. And the clients that we serve are ever changing, but also are demanding different things now, particularly as Gen Z and the transfer of wealth is in play from the next generation to this one. There's 4.5 trillion worth of wealth that's transferring who have different expectations. So, all the voluntary work that I do is really about, if I can change one person's life, then that's the job well done.
I remember reading that in another interview where you talk about kind of your upbringing and that first role that you applied to that you didn't ultimately get, and you felt like the lack of diversity, or at least thought, or I guess lack of diversity in the workplace was partially a factor. Maybe it was a lot of the decision behind you not getting hired. Was that also kind of driving you, or am I just putting words in your mouth around like this project?
Well, I think the thing here is that we're all in a position of influence now, and it's about using that influence for good. So yes, I've had some very challenging experiences throughout my career, but it's about being able to share those experiences and create them into learnings or changes in policies that's going to benefit the next generation. So rather than like pulling the ladder up, it's pushing the ladder down to let the next person to be able to come up. And I think the way I'd sort of see it is that my experience has allowed me to see some areas that could be enhanced in the way we conduct ourselves in industry or in terms of leadership. There's very much a one-size-fits-all process, and I think you might have seen in that interview too. It's all around what can we do to rip up the rule book. Because what good looks like, so as an organization that I work for is 25 years old. The only way it's going to survive for the next 325 years is that it evolves with the time. And one of the biggest change that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution is technology. I mean, who would have thought that we'll be talking on a podcast from one in London and one in Canada, and the way we've connected. In the same ways, is just because I've gone through that experience, let's use that experience for good, and let's challenge some of these practices so that it will drive good for each individual in the workforce, or our clients, or for the benefit of the investment products that we have. And that's probably what's driven me more so.
Do you see a lot of other Tamil faces in like the leadership positions in the finance industry in the UK, or like, I guess, London? Like, have you run across others?
Not many, actually, not at all. So when there is, I'm always touching base and seeing what they're doing, what we can learn and what we can do together. I think you also had an individual on here before, Karen, from Wealth Kennel. He used to be a client of mine, actually, when he was working at Barclays. So we keep in touch and we always see each other. But actually very few. And that's the thing. In some of the roles that individuals are applying for, could they apply for different roles that they are in leadership, in front office roles, rather than taking the middle or the back office roles? And that's, if you can help guide and inspire to be able to do that, that'd be fantastic. There's a young lady, actually, who's done a great job, just recently graduated, and a consultancy firm, which, I just thought was incredibly inspiring, which I was judging on a panel for, but I would not have known about her if I hadn't come across her application. But there's more coming in the new generation.
Where do you see yourself in like the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, before, I was very goal orientated. I knew exactly what I wanted to do every milestone. I'm a lot more open at the moment in terms of what I like to do. I'm half debating more creative things like writing a book in 5 years' time. I'm currently doing a lot of articles on different topics at the moment, which has created a lot of self-awareness and different thought processes that I hadn't really delved into before. So that might take me into a different angle. I spend a lot of time helping kids in the next generation to work. I'm half debating, do I do that a little bit more in a larger scale, or do I just take a bigger role in the finance industry as well? You can maybe do a combination of all of those. So I'm not going to commit to anything specific, but I think one of those three.
Interesting. Yeah, if you listen to a previous episode, Roy Ratnavel, he started as a mail clerk, went to like VP of sales at like CI Financial, and I think he just wrote a book, or he's in the middle of writing a book. So I feel like I've seen that trend now with people in finance. I guess like going from analytical to maybe like a bit more creative. You want to exercise that part of your brain a bit more. Another part of, I guess, the future, I guess, is kind of the present as well. And I wouldn't be a good interviewer, if you want to call it that, if I didn't ask you about it. But cryptocurrency, like, how do you feel about that in general? How does that impact you from like an institutional finance point of view, in terms of, I guess, products you guys create? Or yeah, I'm just curious about, I guess, your viewpoint on it being across the pond, because I kind of get a sense of it here in Canada and the US. But yeah,
I mean, crypto is a growing space. I think originally there was a lot of credibility issues associated with it. That's changing slowly now. I mean, it started off as a technology world. Coming into finance is about then seeing how it plays against central banks, because ultimately it impacts money supply. So the success of it is going to be dependent on how the central banks view it. The second part on this is regulation, transfer of ownership, how those sorts of things work. And given that finance is a heavily regulated industry, I mean, there's been a lot of progress, given that there's ETFs that have been launched in cryptocurrencies at the moment. There's organizations are now coming in that bridge the gap between finance and technology to find a medium point, which are now growing very significantly. And there's organizations, what you need is financial organizations to start investing and doing the work in it. So I think it's probably still a growing area, because you need to pass those technology hurdles and the due diligence before that work gets done. There's a lot of investing happening at the moment. So it's absolutely a growing trend. I don't think it's something that's going away. But it's now got to work within the framework of the financial industry, or the financial industry has to also evolve to capture it. And that's where it's interesting at the moment, because, you know, when you're running a business, what you're thinking about is what mega trends do you want to capture. From my perspective, you know, it could be a product that the organization needs to develop. But that's not, but is it a priority right now for us? And for some organizations it'll be top priority, and less so in the others, because there's other trends that we want to capture first.
Got it. Do you, I guess this is more of a personal question, do you invest in any kind of cryptocurrency, if you're allowed to say?
Money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free?
Well, that's the thing. No,
what is your general investing strategy? You can share high level details, whatever you want to share.
Okay, let's go with general investing strategies. So I actually look at things very much on the long term. So I have not actually changed my investment portfolio massively since I tweaked it pre-financial crisis, because ultimately, if I'm investing for my retirement, long-term investment solutions work. So I have a lot of multi-asset portfolios, but I also have things that I like quite dabbling with new trends, and particularly around ESG and themes and sustainable investing. So I am invested in some of those areas as well, and infrastructure. So something that's going to balance out my portfolio so that I can use it in 10 to 15 years time. So it varies on the time horizon to portfolios, what I'm invested in.
So like, are you strictly in, like, since you're in the financial space, like just financial products, or like, do you invest in like hard assets like real estate, or just businesses, or are these things you're considering, or is it strictly, I know this really well, I'm going to stick with what I know best, which is kind of financial products that are long term?
No, I mean, I do have property as well, but I think in the UK, the property market has changed quite significantly, that you can't have multiple portfolios without being not so tax efficient. Whereas before, that would have been the easiest angle to go down. I'd love to say that, you know, I was buying fine art and that sort of thing, and great wines, but most of that wine has been drunk over COVID, so that hasn't gone so well. But I think I've focused very much on those areas. For me, it's less, you know, it's not so much about accumulation. It's, you know, it's about having enough so that you can retire. The rest is actually about enjoying. So, you know, whether that's a sailing trip and those sort of things, that's the sort of things I focus more in on than multiple investment portfolios, if I'm totally honest. Not sure I should say that given the job I do, but that's what I do.
What is a failure, or like better word, I guess the better wording would be learning lesson you've experienced in the last 3 years, and what did you learn from that experience?
Actually, I would say a personal one at the moment is actually learning to get off the treadmill. So it's very, one of my hardest learnings is actually learning to take care of yourself, have a better work-life balance, and thinking about what you need to do to bring your best self, both to work and at home. And it's not necessarily how everyone else has done it, to how you want to do it. And I can't say that I've got it perfect. It has been a massive learning journey, particularly as you take on more leadership opportunities. You think about, you know, what's your leadership style? How do you bring your authentic self to work? Who are you? And that's been an interesting struggle, if I'm totally honest, because I think in the beginning part of my career, I was just what everyone wanted me to be. You emulated everybody else, but guess what? When you emulate everybody else, you're not showing who you are. And when I was started in the industry, there weren't anyone that looked like me. So that was an interesting journey. And now to be able to then figure that out, to, you know, how you conduct your workday, what is it that you need to do to be successful? How do you prioritize? And to do that, It's something that I'm constantly still learning to do, but it's something that I wish I actually understood that a lot earlier.
What's been the impact of the UK Tamil community on you on a personal and professional level?
And
are you like, and sorry, are you also like, how, maybe talk about how connected you are to that community as well?
I think the community has really provided a lot of support. The support was not just for me, but for my family, to just help you to get to where you need to be, whether that's, all the way through as a child, through tuition and other areas, people finding you guidance to get to the next stage. So that's what's really been great. And in the same way, I want to be able to give back to the next generation to be able to do that. And it's great. My uncle was, my mama was fantastic at that. It was all about him retiring early and seeing how he can lift the Tamil community. So, it's been very inspiring to watch what he was doing all these years, and be able to pick up some of the mantelpiece of that as going forward.
If you had a chance to go back in a time machine and visit 16-year-old Afi, what would you tell her?
It'll probably go back to what I was saying around self-care and those sort of things. I think, that it's okay to show your vulnerable self and be who you truly are, rather than pretending to be what everyone else wants you to be. I think as, having come over at two years old, you're sort of figuring out who your identity is. And I spent probably the beginning part of my career a bit of a chameleon, absorbing what everybody else was. And then it was like, who am I? Because you flexed yourself into each one of those scenarios. And, am I somebody that's part of the Sri Lankan community? Am I someone part of the British community? And you don't need to be the chameleon. You can just be who you are. And I think that's probably one of my biggest learnings actually recently, probably in the last 3 to 5 years. And being a combination of some of those things is absolutely fine.
In terms of your, now looking forward, in terms of your personal legacy, how would you want to be remembered by your friends and family?
I think somebody has pushed the boundaries to really help other people, to look at really what good looks like, and if and that I did help some people along the way, that would be absolutely fantastic.
And that's a good segue into the last segment of our podcast. So it's a game they like to call Creator Confessions. It's going to basically be a speed run where I say a bunch of statements and you'll tell me the first answer that pops up in your head. Ready?
Okay.
Awesome.
Go for it.
Favorite Tamil food?
Mutton rolls.
Something that scares you?
Oh, heights.
Insecurity that you have?
It goes back to what I said before, being vulnerable.
Favorite show you're watching?
Oh, This Is Us.
Great show. Place you're itching to travel to after this pandemic is over, or handled, whatever you want to call it.
I'm going away in 3 weeks. I'm going to Grenada in the Caribbean. But in terms of where I'd love to go, it's definitely go back to Africa.
Which part of Africa?
So I was in Namibia, Botswana and Zimbabwe, but I think I'd go back to Namibia and maybe Kenya as well.
I loved Kenya when I went there. Fellow Tamil creator you want to give a shout out to?
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
That's okay. Favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory, I think, is just spending a lot of time with, one of my mum's family party with lots of food and family and friends out in the garden.
Something you like to do for fun outside of work?
Sailing.
Favorite movie of all time?
Oh, that's a really hard one. Maybe Godfather 2.
A purchase you've made in the last couple of years that you've splurged on, but you have zero regret about it?
I did an outrageous shopping spree at Selfridges with a personal shopper. So it's clothes.
Pet peeve?
Pet peeve. Oh, somebody that keeps on saying donkeys years ago, which is a very industry thing.
Okay. I was like, I have no idea what that is. Okay. If you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have.
Well, it's probably just not spending enough time with family and friends at this time. Spending more.
Celebrity whose life you'd want to experience for one day.
Roger Federer.
Favorite book you've read or podcast you've listened to that's recently had an impact on you?
Oh gosh, there's lots of books, but I would actually probably say the one that's it's quite commercial, but I'd say Becoming by Michelle Obama.
A belief, behavior, or habit that's improved your life.
Curiosity.
And finally, a piece of advice that you would give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there.
To think big. Everything is achievable if you think big.
Love it. Well, that was awesome. Api, that was a great episode. You had a lot of really good insights. I think people will enjoy it. For somebody listening that was inspired by your story or just wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
On LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. You just search my name.
Awesome. I'll share that in the show notes. So thank you again for jumping on the podcast. And for those of you listening, appreciate you guys as always. On to the next episode.
Thank you for having me.